Hi class. Okay, so chapter 17 was quite a tearjerker. I apologize for that. Goodness. All right, chapter 18. Awareness came long after I'd come to recognize my mother's smell and learned how to fight my way to her teat for nourishment. My eyes were open and my vision was starting to sharpen well enough for me to see my mother's dark face the day I understood with a jolt that I was a puppy again. So just to stop real quick and clarify, so Bailey died in the last chapter and now is born again. Now that wasn't quite it. It was more that I was a puppy who suddenly remembered being me again. I had this sense of drifting in my sleep, aware of nothing but the long, long passage of time, not dreaming, not even thinking, and then in a blink, I was looking at the world through the eyes of a very young dog. Yet somehow I remembered being the same puppy since birth, scrambling for my mother's milk without any awareness of my previous lives. Now that I remembered everything that had come before, I was truly puzzled. It felt so complete. There just didn't seem to be any reason for me to go on. How could I possibly have a more important mission than loving the boy? I missed Ethan so much, I sometimes whimpered, which my new siblings always mistook for a weakness and jumped on me with the intent to dominate. There were 7 of them, all dark brown with black markings, and I was impatient with the idea that they didn't recognize who was going to be in charge here. A woman took care of us most of the time, though there was a man who often came down into the basement to feed us, and it was he who carried us in a box to the backyard when we were a few weeks old. The male dog in a cage sniffed at us when we all ran over to see him, and I understood instinctively that this was our father. I'd never met a father before, and was curious as to what he was doing there. "He seems fine with them," the man said to the woman. "You gonna be okay, Bernie? You wanna come out?" The woman opened father's cage. His name was obviously Bernie, and the male dog bounded out, sniffed at us, and then went over to pee on the fence. We all galloped after him, falling on our faces because our puppy legs could barely move. Bernie put his face down, and one of my brothers jumped up and disrespectfully bit at his ears. But Bernie didn't seem to mind. He even played with us a little, knocking us around before trotting over to the back door to be let in. A few weeks later, I was in the yard showing one of my brothers who was boss. When I stopped and squatted at once, I realized I was a female. I sniffed in amazement at my urine, snarling a warning when my brother took the opportunity to barrel into me. What would Ethan think? How could I, Bailey, be a girl dog? Except I wasn't Bailey. One day, a man came and played with us in an unusual fashion. He clapped his hands, and the puppies who didn't cower from the noise, I was one of them, he put into a box. Then one at a time, he took those of us in the box out into the yard. When it was my turn, he turned and walked away from me as if he'd forgotten I was there, so I followed. He told me I was a good dog just for doing that. This guy was a pushover. It was about the age that Mom had been the day she broke the car window and gave me some water the first day I ever saw the boy. The man put me inside a t-shirt and then spoke to me, calling me, "Hey girl, can you find your way out?" I figured he just changed his mind about wanting me bagged up inside the shirt, so I jumped out and ran over to him again for more praise. The woman had come out into the yard to watch. "Most of them take a minute to figure it out, but this one's pretty bright," the man remarked. He flipped me over on my back and I squirmed with it, playing, thinking to myself that it was unfair since he was so much bigger than I was. "She doesn't like that, Jacob," the woman observed. "None of them like it. The question is, will she stop struggling and let me be the boss, or will she keep fighting? I got to have a dog that knows I'm the boss," the man said. I heard the word dog and it didn't sound angry. I wasn't being punished, but I was being pinned down. I figured I didn't know what sort of game we were playing now, so I just relaxed without struggle. "Good girl," he said again. Then he took a ball of paper and showed it to me, waving it around until I became absolutely tantalized. I felt stupid and uncoordinated and tried to get a bite of the thing with my little puppy mouth when it was right there in front of me, but I couldn't move my head fast enough. Then he tossed it a few feet away, so I ran over and pounced on it. Ha! Try to get it now. Then I remembered Ethan and the stupid flip, how happy it made him when I brought the thing back to him. I turned around and trotted back to the man, dropping the ball at his feet and sitting for him to throw it again. "This one," the man said to the woman. "I'll take this one." I whimpered when I saw the kind of car ride I was going to be taken in the back of a truck, locked in a cage very similar to the one that had taken me to the hot, noisy room with Spike. I was a front seat dog. Anyone could tell that. My new home reminded me of the apartment where we went to live after the fire. It was small, with a balcony over a parking lot, but it was down the street from a nice park where the man took me several times a day. I knew I was far away from Ethan by the smell of the trees and bushes. This wasn't a wet place like the farm with frequent rain, though it was lush with flowers and shrubbery. The air was tinged with a strong smell of automobiles, which I could hear driving in the near and far distance every single hour of the day. Sometimes a hot, dry wind blew in, reminding me of the yard, but other days the air was thick with moisture, which never happened when I was Toby. The man's name was Jacob, and he named me Elia. It's Swedish for moose. You're not a German shepherd. You're a Swedish shepherd now. I wagged in non-comprehension. Elia, Elia, come, Ellie, come. His hands smelled of oil, and his car, and of papers, and of people. Jacob wore dark clothes and wore metal objects on his belt, including a gun, so I figured he was a policeman. When he was gone during the day, a nice woman named Georgia came over every few hours to play with me and take me for a walk. She reminded me of Chelsea, who lived down the street from Ethan and me and had a dog named Marshmallow and then later Duchess. Georgia had all sorts of names for me, some of them really silly like Ellie Welly, Cuddle Coo. It was sort of like being called a doodle dog. It was my name, but different, delivered with an extra dose of affection. I was doing my best to adjust to this new life as Ellie, so different from my life as Bailey. Jacob gave me a dog bed very similar to the one I'd been given in the garage, but this time I was expected to sleep in it. Jacob pushed me away when I tried to crawl under the covers with him, even though I could see he had plenty of room. I understood that what was expected of me was to live with the new rules, the way I'd learned to live with Ethan going to college. The sharp pain I felt when I thought about how much I missed the boy was just something to get used to. A dog's job was to do what people wanted. There was, though, a difference between obeying commands and having a purpose, a reason for being. I thought my purpose was to be with Ethan, and then I'd fulfilled that purpose, being by his side as he grew up. If that was the case, why was I now Ellie? Could a dog have more than one purpose? Jacob treated me with a calm patience. When my little bladder suddenly signaled and let go all in the same rush, he never yelled and ran me out the door like the boy used to. He just gave me such praise when I went outside that I resolved to get my body under control as soon as I could manage. But Jacob didn't gush affection the way the boy did. Jacob focused on me in the business-like fashion. Ethan focused on Flair, the horse. And to an extent, I liked the sense of direction it gave me, though there were other times I pined for the feel of the boy's hands on my fur and couldn't wait for Georgia to come over and call me Ellie Welly Cuddle Coo. There was, I came to feel, something broken inside Jacob. I didn't know what it was, but I could sense something drawing energy from his emotions, a dark bitterness that seemed to me very similar to what I felt inside Ethan when he first came home after the fire. Whatever it was, it kept Jacob's feelings toward me in check. Whenever he and I did something together, I could feel him evaluating me with cool eyes. "Let's go to work," Jacob would say. He'd load me in the truck, and off we'd go to the park for games. I learned drop, which meant to lie down, and I learned that to Jacob, stay really meant stay. And I was expected to remain in the same spot until he told me to come. The training helped me keep my mind off Ethan. At night, though, I often fell asleep thinking of the boy. I thought of his hands in my fur, the smell of him as he slept, his laugh and his voice. Wherever he was, whatever he was doing, I hoped he was happy. I knew I would never see him again. Georgia started coming over less often as I got older, but I found that I didn't miss her as I became more and more immersed in our work. One day we went to some woods and met a man named Wally who petted me and then ran away. "What's he doing, Ellie? Where is he going?" Jacob asked me. I watched Wally, who was looking over his shoulder at me, waving excitedly. "Find him! Find!" Jacob told me. Uncertainly, I started trotting off after Wally. What was this? Wally saw me coming after him and dropped to his knees, clapping. And when I caught up to him, he showed me a stick, and we played with it for a few minutes. Then Wally stood up. "Look, Ellie, what's he doing?" "Find him," Wally said. Jacob was strolling off, and I ran after him. "Good dog," Jacob praised. As intelligent games go, I'd probably put it right up there with chasing the flip, but Wally and Jacob seemed to enjoy it, so I went along with it, especially since afterward we got to play tug on a stick, which in my mind beat Find Wally hands down. It was around the time I started learning Find that a strange sensation gripped me, a restless anxiousness accompanied by an embarrassing odor from my rear end. Mom and Grandma used to complain any time I released fragrant gases from under my tail. So when I started discharging this smell, I knew I was a bad dog. Grandpa was so offended by bad odors that he'd say, "Oh, Bailey," even when the smell came from him. Jacob didn't notice the odor, but he did register alarm at all the dogs lifting their legs on the bushes around the apartment. Dogs I knew instinctively were milling around because of me. Jacob's reaction was most curious. He put me into a pair of shorts like the ones he wore under his pants, my tail sticking out a hole in the back. I'd always felt sorry for dogs who wore sweaters and other clothes, and here I was playing dress up in front of all those male dogs. It was more than a little embarrassing, especially since that there was something compelling about the attention I was being shown by the motley pack of males who were so busy wetting the shrubbery outside my home. Jacob said, "Time to see the vet," and took me for a car ride to a place that was very familiar, a cool room with bright lights and a metal table. I fell asleep and predictably was wearing a stupid cone-shaped collar when I woke back up. As soon as the cone came off, Jacob and I were back at the park almost every day for the next several months. The days grew shorter, though it never got cold or came close to snowing, and finding Wally became harder and harder because they kept changing the rules on me. Sometimes Wally wouldn't even be there when we arrived, and I'd have to go find him where he'd wandered off to. He'd be lying around like Grandpa doing chores, and I learned another command, "Show me," which meant leading Jacob back to where I'd come across Wally's lazy body sprawled under a tree. Somehow Jacob could tell when I found something, even when it was just one of Wally's socks left on the ground. The man was a disaster, always dropping his clothes for us to find and pick up. Jacob would read my look when I came running back to him. "Show me," he'd say, but only when I had something to show. We did other work too. Jacob taught me how to climb up a slide and to ease myself down the ladder on the other side, making me do it a step at a time instead of just jumping from the top as I preferred. He taught me to crawl into tight cubes and to leap up on a stack of logs, and one day he had me sit while he removed the gun from his side and shot off some explosions that made me flinch the first couple of times. "Good girl, Ellie. This is a gun, see? No reason to be afraid. It makes a loud noise, but you're not afraid, are you, girl?" I sniffed at it when he held it out to me and was very glad when he didn't try to make me fetch it. The thing smelled bad and looked like it would fly worse than the flip. Sometimes Jacob would sit at an outside table with other people with guns and drink from bottles. It was at times like these that his internal turmoil was most evident to me. The people at the table would laugh, and sometimes Jacob would join in, and other times he'd turn inward, dark and sad and alone. "Isn't that right, Jacob?" one of the men said one time. I heard the name, but Jacob was staring off into space, not paying attention. I sat up and nuzzled his hand, but when he petted me, I sensed he didn't really register that I was there. I said, "Isn't that right, Jacob?" Jacob turned and looked at everyone watching him, and I sensed he felt embarrassed. "What?" "If Y2K is as bad as they say it's going to be, we're going to need every K9 unit we can get. Be like Rodney King all over again." "Ellie's not that kind of dog," Jacob said coldly. I straightened at the sound of my name, conscious as I did so that all the men at the table were looking at me. I felt uneasy for some reason, just as some of the men seemed uncomfortable with Jacob's stare. When they started talking again, it was to each other, ignoring Jacob. I nuzzled his hand once more, and this time he responded by scratching my ears. "Good dog, Ellie," he said. Find Wally evolved into just Find. Jacob and I would go somewhere, and sometimes I'd be given something to sniff, an old coat or shoe or a glove, and I'd have to find the person who it belonged to. Other times there'd be nothing to sniff, and I'd course back and forth over a huge area, alerting anytime it picked up the scent of something interesting. I found a lot of people who weren't Wally, and sometimes they were obviously not informed of the game and would call, "Here, boy," or otherwise react to me when they saw me. I'd always show Jacob these people, and he always praised me, even if the people I'd found weren't bright enough to know what was going on. The point, I realized, was to find people and to take Jacob to them and let Jacob decide if they were the right people or not. That was my job. I'd been with Jacob for about a year when he started taking me to his work every day. A lot of people dressed like Jacob milled around and were mostly friendly to me, though they drew back respectfully when Jacob told me to heel. He took me to a kennel and back with 2 other dogs, Cammy and Gypsy. Cammy was jet black and Gypsy was brown. Despite the fact that they were all caged together, my relationship with Cammy and Gypsy was different than I'd ever had with other canines. We were working dogs and didn't feel free to play much because we always needed to be ready to serve our masters. Most of the time, we just alertly sat at the fence. Gypsy worked with a policeman named Paul and was gone a lot. And sometimes I watched Paul and Gypsy work in the yard. They did it all wrong. Gypsy would just smell in between boxes and piles of clothing and would alert for no reason, though Paul always praised her anyway, pulling out a package from the items and tell Gypsy she was a good dog. Cammy was older and didn't bother to watch Gypsy, probably feeling embarrassed for the poor dog. Cammy worked with a police woman named Amy and didn't go out much. When he did, though, he went out fast. Amy would come get him and they'd leave at a run. I never knew what Cammy's work was, but I suspected it was as important as Find. It wasn't as important as Find. Where are you working this week? Amy asked Paul once. Back at the airport until Garcia comes off sick leave, Paul told her. How's life on the bomb squad? Quiet. I'm worried about Cammy, though. His scores have been off a little. I'm wondering if his nose is going. At the sound of his name, Cammy raised his head, and I looked over at him. He's what, 10 years old now? Paul asked. About that, Amy said. I stood up and shook myself off because I could sense Jacob coming, and a few seconds later, he walked around the corner. He and his friends stood and talked while we dogs watched them, wondering why they didn't let us out in the yard to be with them. Suddenly, I felt some excitement off Jacob. He spoke to his shoulder. 10-4, Unit 8, Kilo 6, responding, he said while Amy ran over to the gate. Cammy jumped up. Ellie, Amy commanded, come. We were out of the yard and I was up in the truck in just moments. I found myself panting, picking up on Jacob's excitement. Something told me that whatever was happening, it was far more important than Find Wally.